What's up guys, today we're gonna see how we are going to destroy the queen's pawn move by going pawn to c5, known as the Old Benoni Defense, and let's see if we can teach the Old Benoni new tricks. The first big advantage of this opening is simplicity. You really don't need to study anything but the Old Benoni Defense. It also shuts down instantly all kinds of Jobava London, Catalan, Trompowsky opening variations. Even the London system is actually not working really well against it. First of all, they can't play pawn e3, the move which they often play in such situations because it blocks the bishop f4 and they did not have any time to put the bishop out. Of course, instead they may play pawn to c3 first, but nevertheless pawn c5 move gives you a very handy option of going queen b6 as soon as the bishop comes out. For example, knight f6, and as soon as they play the bishop out, hoping to play e3, solidify their position, you straight away play queen to b6, or you can trade on d4 first and then play queen b6, targeting this pawn on b2, which is no longer defended by the queen. And since you begin your attack so early, they had no time to solidify their position. Now, what can they do? Like, they can't play the moves such as queen to b3 because now this pawn on d4 is undefended. Similarly, queen to d2 does not look very appealing because you can go knight e4 and attack the queen straight away. Therefore, in most cases, they're gonna play pawn b3 without seeing any big problem with this move, but in reality, it's a serious weakness. Now, all the dark squares around them, including their king, are very vulnerable, and as soon as you put your bishop out there to b4, they're gonna experience big problems. For example, right now after pawn to b3, you can go knight c6, hitting this pawn twice, and after they guard it, you really wish to break open the center with e5. Sometimes you can even sacrifice a pawn just to bring your bishop out to b4 quickly, but in this case it's easier to play d6 first, preparing this move pawn e5. That is something they do not anticipate, especially in the London system, because they hope to have that very fixed and solid position, but now as they play pawn e3, you actually play pawn e5, and now it's really tough for white already. You attack the bishop, attack this pawn. After the exchange, they think that they can win this pawn, but actually even if they move the bishop away, it's bad anyways. But for example, if they take it, what they're missing is these weaknesses. You can play the bishop b4 and they're in trouble straight away. In this situation, queen a5 perhaps is even easier. That is just a straightforward double attack of the king and knight. On the next move, you're going to pick up this knight. If they try to avoid that by going queen to d2, you can actually play bishop b4, and that is even stronger. For some reason, it shows me that it is a draw, but it clearly isn't, because after bishop b4, you're pinning the queen and you're going to win it. Another nice thing about the Old Benoni is that on the level below 1600, the most played move by white here is accepting this pawn gambit, which is a bad idea for white. You're going to play pawn e6, get the pawn back easily, and in the meantime, you are also destroying their center and you're developing your bishop. Life's good. If they try to hold on to this pawn by going pawn b4, that actually makes their situation even worse. Now you can play a5, undermine this pawn chain, and they're unable to maintain it. If they actually split up their pawns, then you can get them back easily, grab this pawn, later you're gonna grab the other one, and they're ending up with these weaknesses and nothing else. Moreover, in some variations, if let's say they try to also guard this pawn by going bishop d2, that also blunders queen to f6 with a double attack to this pawn and the rook in the corner of the board. And we also have the bishop threatening this pawn, so it's really easy for white to spoil their position here. A super common trick to fall for is pawn to c3, because now you've got this straight on b4 followed by queen to f6, and that is the move that white missed. It is interesting that the same trap is quite well known with reversed colors when you use it as white in the queen's gambit, but somehow most of the players are unaware of the fact that you can use the exact same trap playing black. Against the Old Benoni, the strongest move objectively, and that's the move played by strong players, is the move pawn to d5. We'll talk about that in a moment, but for now let me also address the other common move. It is the move pawn to c4, which is also surprisingly popular. But actually, this is clearly a mistake. Now after this exchange on d4, what can white do? If they capture with a queen, they're giving you this extra tempo for your attack. But trying to be tricky and playing knight f3 and getting it back with a knight fails to the move pawn to e5. Now this pawn is guarded, but if they try to grab the other one, which seems like a blunder from your side, you actually respond with queen to a5 with this double attack and you successfully trick them. Going back to the most natural queen takes d4 line, what I really love about this is that here the most popular and most natural moves of white lead them straight to disaster. They move the queen back, you continue with knight f6, potentially preparing to break open the center with pawn d5, As they develop, you then play e6, providing additional support for this move, and then you actually do it. Now, in most cases, they're going to trade on d5, which is actually another mistake of white. This allows you to open up the diagonal for your bishop. That is cool. Now, they usually follow up with another attempted move, which turns out to be a decisive error. They go bishop g5. They think that they're pinning this knight and indirectly pressuring this pawn on d5, and that everything is good, but in reality, they're already losing the game. You play pawn d4, and that is the move that they underestimated. Now you attack the knight, and what can white do? You don't want to move it back to b1 to where it started, and black would play bishop b4 check and just continue with the quick development. Also, this pawn on d4 makes it harder for white to finish their development, because whenever they try to move the pawn forward in the future, you can always capture it. In most cases, they're going to play knight e4, thinking that they can actually exploit this pin, put more pressure to the knight, and you'll need to defend somehow, but instead, you sacrifice the queen by playing knight takes e4, and it turns out that they fell for yet another trap. Bishop takes d8 does not win the queen, because after bishop b4, they need to cover their king, and after knight to d2, you take it once again, and now they have nothing to do but to give up their own queen. Now, as a result of this mass exchange of things, we can see that at the end of the day, black is up a knight in a very simple endgame position, and hopefully you can win it. Stronger opponents and those who don't play the London system will usually play pawn d5. In this case, you continue with knight f6, taking away this square so that they can't easily play e4 and solidify their center. Therefore, they will usually play pawn c4, defending their center that way, and at this point you are at the crossroad. So there are two ways to handle this position. The first option is to play the Benko Gambit, going for b5, and then for pawn a6, and after this trade you have this situation where you sacrifice the pawn, but you have a quicker development and a lot of lines and diagonals for your pieces and some clear attacking ideas. Now, I won't talk about this because that is a separate opening. I've got another video about this, so if you want to see it, I'll drop a link down below in the description. Actually, even if you don't want to see it, I'll drop it down below in the description anyways. But speaking about the Benko Gambit, it's a nice opening, but I understand that maybe not everybody wants to play this. Therefore, here you can also just play the Old Benoni itself. In this case, you just play pawn d6 to have some presence in the center to stop e4, e5 for some reason, if they ever want to really push that. After this, if they go something like knight c3, you then play pawn g6. Similar to the Benko Gambit, you clearly want to develop the bishop to this diagonal, because it is open, thanks to their pawn being pushed forward. Now it's an open diagonal, virtually free of pawns, and you want to put your bishop there. Well, this diagonal is clearly blocked. After this, they're going to play pawn e4, you put the bishop to this nice position, and at this point it's important to understand your plan, because white can develop their pieces anyhow. If you think about this, they can develop this bishop to e3, f4, g5, and same thing with other pieces, they can develop them anyhow. But it doesn't really matter. Your way of development and your plan remains to be the same. Therefore, if you understand your setup, you're going to play it well, and I'll focus on that rather than very specific variations. The most played move by white here is actually pawn f4. They're trying to be ambitious and grab the center completely. To this you simply castle. By the way, we never worry, or at least early in the game, about this move pawn e5, because right now they're totally undeveloped, and therefore it is clearly premature for them to try attacking you. Now after the exchange and knight g4, actually they're in trouble, and they're going down because they overextended their position without enough support from their pieces. Therefore, it's better for white to just continue their development, play knight to f3. Now, how are you going to attack in this position? Usually, you need to undermine their pawn chain here in the middle of the board, because it is indeed quite strong. How do you do that? There are two ways. It's either pawn a6 or pawn b5. You usually prepare that by going a6 first. So these are the two classical ideas here, as well as in all kinds of Benko Gambit stuff, to attack the white center. Now, you usually begin with the move pawn e6 just because it's easier. You can play it straight away with no preparation. While in order to actually arrange that a6 b5, you usually need to spend some time because white controls that square pretty well. Therefore, we begin with pawn to e6. And after that, they will continue their development somehow. We never worry about pawn take e6. That is actually a positional mistake from white side, because this pawn on d5 is very strong. It ensures white space advantage. It takes away this good square from your knight to be developed to, and therefore if they voluntarily give up their positional advantage, nice. You can recapture either by the bishop or by the pawn. In this case, you also strengthen your own control in the middle of the board, and things are pretty nice. On the next turn, you can develop your knight to c6. Later, you can bring it to d4. You've got this semi-open file for your rook. Maybe you can even in some lines play knight h5 and take aim at this pawn, and then bring the other knight to d4. You can see that it actually makes it easier for you to play after white gave up their central control. Therefore, if your opponent knows this, they're going to play something like bishop e2, then you can successfully trade in the middle of the board. They can recapture with either pawn, but it doesn't really matter, your plan will be the same. After this, we have this nice file for our rook, and we also need to complete the development of our queenside. I love playing bishop g4 in these positions just for its simplicity, even if objectively you have some other ideas to play. You need to complete the development of your queenside pieces somehow. If you play knight to d7 straight away, you block your own bishop. And that is why we first put the bishop out, and after that on the next move we play knight d7. Now you completed your development and things are good. If they ever play pawn h3, and usually they will, that's not a problem, we're gonna trade it off. This knight from f3 was actually an important piece, supporting this potential e5 advancement, and therefore we're okay to trade off this knight. And then you can also go rook e8, another common move, putting your rook to the active position, and putting pressure down this pawn, although right now it is defended, but anyways, in the future white will need to take care of it. Sometimes, if white is careless, you've got even this move b5, trying to distract the knight and then to grab this central pawn, which is more important than a side pawn. Even those tactical tricks are available. Sometimes they'll try to just reinforce the center and go something like rook to e1. Now, what do you do then? If you can't attack their center anymore, then you switch over to the second main plan, your expansion on the queenside. And you start by playing a6, followed by b5. If they allow this thing to happen, usually it's actually not very nice for them, because now these pawns are ready to be pushed forward, they always have to take an eye on that, and what can they really do? And quite often they're going to blunder, actually. They're going to play something, and after b4, it turns out that the knight is kicked away, and after he goes, you can grab this pawn on e4, using the support of your rook, and just they often overlook the fact that you can play b4, kick out the knight, and then grab the central pawn. Sadly, some of your opponents will be cruel enough to shut down this idea by going pawn a4, but we're gonna cry a little bit and then continue our expansion on the queenside anyways. There are a couple of ways to do that. You can go rook b8 and prepare this move. Potentially you can even maybe open up the b file for your rook in some variations, which together with this bishop pressure can have some interesting ideas for your counterattack here. Or the other move that is also very common here is actually pushing the c pawn forward. And that allows you on the next turn, let's say they go king h1 to move the king out of this diagonal, to bring the knight to c5. That is the real idea behind this move. And from c5, the knight is doing an excellent job. It actually puts pressure to this pawn, but it is also ready to be brought to either d3 or to b3. Therefore, this knight is a total monster, and if you can get to this point, usually it means that you're actually taking over and you're going to be winning. For example, if let's say they play queen c2 to guard this pawn, you can easily jump with your knight in one of these directions. That is already cool. Sometimes you can also prepare this b5, b4 push later. And in this case particularly, you can even play b5 straight away with no preparation. Again, as long as you did this thing, usually it means that you're taking over, because you've got this really powerful pawn majority on the queen side that is ready to be pushed forward. And right now they need to address this thing, so they need to trade rooks, and of course they think, hey, how about knight takes b5? But in this game, black prepared a really interesting counter. They played queen a5 with this double attack, therefore the only way to save that is knight to c3, but here black's got a really wonderful move, knight takes d5, capturing the most defended pawn in white's position because of this dual pin. White can't recapture with either piece because it is pinned. It's really nice. After that, you've got a ton of threats. You're putting a lot of pressure to this knight. You're ready to play knight d3, knight b3 probably not, knight d3 or knight b4, and basically black is achieving a winning position. Now, of course, here we are a little bit fantasizing. Your opponent could play something else, but I hope that you understand in general the plan and how you should play this as black. Having said that, I understand that positional chess with all these maneuvers, planning and intricate moves may seem intimidating. That is why I've got a free masterclass that you can attend by clicking the link up there or down below in the description, where I share with you some simple guidelines to elevate your positional chess. And if you decide instead of this Old Benoni thing to play the Banco Gambit, which I mentioned previously, you can check it out by clicking the link out there.